Right. All right, folks, welcome to the first workshop for the Biogeosciences sections, uh, Careers Beyond Academia. So this one is going to be the U.S. Federal Civil Service workshop. Um, as a heads up, it's two parts. The first hour-ish is going to be a panel discussion with our three wonderful panelists. Unfortunately, one panelist had to be on a helicopter right now and is not able to make it. And then the second portion will be a half hour of breakout rooms where you can go and ask the individual panelists like more specific to their agency questions, so we don't get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty of individual agencies in the main conversation. Uh, as a reminder, so right, the first one today is the civil service careers. Then we have three other workshops throughout the fall. So in September, we'll do federal contractors, where we'll have representatives from NASA, Pacific Northwest National Lab, and the National Center for Atmospheric Research. In October, we're going to do non-governmental agencies as well as private research centers. And that's going to have folks from the Environmental Defense Fund, Woodwell Climate, and the UN Environment Program. And then to round out this whole series, we're going to also get some folks coming back from private industry to chat with all of you. And there we'll have representatives from Bayer Crop Science, Jacobs Engineering Group, Wells Fargo, and we also have one more from Geosyntec, who is going to be part of that. All right, and with that advertisement, I'm going to stop this sharing so that we can focus on our wonderful panelists. And I don't know, panelists, would you like me to introduce y'all, or would you like to take on your introductions?
Your choice, Jesse, whatever you want.
Well, Sasha, because you unmuted yourself, please lead us off in introducing yourselves. And if you'd be so kind of telling us a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from. If you want like sort of a brief bit about how you got to your current position, and a favorite piece of science trivia, which was your icebreaker challenge.
Okay, excellent. Well, my name is Sasha Reed. I'm a scientist with the United States Geological Survey. I live and work out of Moab, Utah, as part of the Southwest Biological Science Center. I've been a federal scientist for all of my career. So I went from graduate school into federal science. And I love doing panels like this and sharing with all of you my winding career path, because I wouldn't have known that a federal scientist job existed if I hadn't been a technician with the federal scientist as a federal scientist prior to going to grad school. So I think in academia, we get great insight into academia because that's where we are, and those are the professions that we're surrounded with, but it's often harder to get to see what other kinds of science jobs are out there. And there's so many other kinds of science jobs that are a really wonderful complement to the kind of jobs that being a professor is, for example. My path was pretty winding coming into the grad school and the job that I have now. And I like to share that because I think a lot of times, especially early career scientists, feel like if you weren't born knowing exactly what you wanted to do, then maybe you're not supposed to be a scientist. But that wasn't the case for me at all. I was a ski bum. I waited tables. I worked as a technician. I did lots of different kinds of things throughout my career. And I think that winding path was not only good for me and the life that I wanted to lead and the adventures that I want to have, but also helped my career, really helped shape the way that I see the world. And we can get into more of that background if needed. But I think that kind of leads into one of the scientific facts that I really like is how much Einstein struggled with school and getting into college. And, we have this incredible genius who we look to for so many rules of the universe, but who had his own winding path, and that we shouldn't feel that we have to have a certain level of achievement at a certain time to be exceptional scientists, or that we have to have have some linear path from, high school to college to graduate school to some kind of job. And so I think federal science offers a really cool way to do science for the people and to have science with a mission of trying to inform and support good decision making in these times of change. And I remember from my own life experience and from talking to lots of early career scientists now, how much we judge ourselves and that path, and we look to it as a kind of whether or not we have what it takes. But each of you on this call has what it takes, and if you looked at my path, you would see how whatever you've decided to do up till now and whatever you decide to do next, it doesn't mean anything in terms of getting what you want. So you can do these things that you want to do, and I hope that the insight that Dave and Tana and I can give just helps a little bit, give context and ideas for how to go about getting what you want as you think about what that is. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And I'm also glad that I did not introduce first, because that set the bar really high. Tanner or Dave, would you like to step up next?
Sure. Sasha's always a tough act to follow, but I'll try my best. So I'm Dave Hoover. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I'm specifically with the Agricultural Research Services. And so that is the kind of science wing of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I've been with federal agencies for 10 years now. So USDA for 7, and then I did a postdoc with the USGS out in Moab with Sasha's group. And so I'm based out of Fort Collins, Colorado. My research is focused on rangelands and how climate change, particularly changes in water, can impact the resilience of these systems, and with a real focus on food production, and in particular beef production. And so kind of that's my current day job, but like Sasha, my path was pretty winding. I got interested in research as an undergraduate back east, studying biocrusts and the desiccation tolerance of algae. So it was a lot of lab work, and knew I liked science, but it felt a little too theoretical and a little too ivory tower for me. So I spent a few years after my undergrad just trying out stuff. So I was doing field jobs. I worked on marmots. I worked in a soil physics lab, did research out in the prairies, and I ended up landing on really a big interest in grasslands and climate change. And so that's what I ended up pursuing for my master's and PhD, was research on that. So my PhD was really focused on climate extremes and grasslands in the tallgrass prairie. And kind of during that time, I really didn't have any sort of federal career on my radar. I was really kind of pushed in like this academic direction just because that was all I knew. My professor I worked for, that's all he did. So I think having a panel like this is awesome, because it would have been nice to know some of these other options out there, and then like what things you could do to sort of set yourself up for different career paths. So then, yeah, I took a postdoc with USGS, and that really kind of opened my eyes to what federal research was. And then looking for jobs, I was applying for both faculty and federal jobs just to cast a wide net, and then ended up with my current job, and it's been working out pretty good. So yeah, happy to be here, happy to answer all your questions. And I guess you're up now, Tanya. Tanya.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Tana Wood. I am a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm based in Luquillo, Puerto Rico. My research focuses on understanding the effects of climate change and land use on tropical ecosystems as a whole. So from urban to wetlands to forests. Like the other panelists, my career did not take a direct path. I did my undergraduate research trying to decide between biochemistry and ecology and evolution. And I got into doing some work in a lab with one of the professors studying the mating behavior of frogs and fish, of all things. And I couldn't decide what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do research. And so after I graduated, I spent 3 years taking different field positions. I traveled throughout the tropics. I did endangered species projects. I looked at habitat assessment. And then I had sort of this critical moment in my career when I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing was focused on addressing the symptom and not the problem, and that we really needed to understand how we could manage land in a way that could still maintain diversity and be sustainable. And so once I had made that decision was when I decided to go back to graduate school and to get my PhD. How I ended up with the government, or even just realizing that these jobs existed, when I was doing my PhD research in Costa Rica, I met another Forest Service scientist, and I thought, wow, he has such a great job. So he was based in Fort Collins, and he had an adjunct position at a university. He didn't have to teach, he didn't have to come up for tenure, but yet he was doing this amazing research in Hawaii and in Puerto Rico. And so that was kind of my first inkling that maybe that would be something I would want to do. And then I was like Dave, I was applying for faculty and, well, mostly applying for university positions. And I had a postdoc that was affiliated with the U.S. Forest Service in Puerto Rico. And I think, during that process of applying, I felt that academia at that time was not very friendly to women. And I had already been out of my PhD for a little while doing work independently, and I didn't want to have to start over to come up for tenure. And then this opportunity, and I realized I didn't really like teaching. And I just wanted to do research, and I wanted to work in the tropics, and I didn't want to have to adjust to my career. And the mission of the Forest Service really aligned with my interests. And so when a position opened, I really fought to have a job with the Forest Service here in Puerto Rico, and it opened and I applied. And so I've been here for the last 9 years. And so what I tell students when I, through mentorship is that, one, as Sasha said, there is no right way to get to your end career goal. And in fact, it never stops. Your career is always evolving and you can adjust as you go along. And the other thing is that only you define what success looks like. And so there can be a lot of pressures to find a job that people understand. Like, okay, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to become a doctor or a lawyer. I'm going to go work for this organization. And so pursuing your dreams or things that, a job that you feel very passionate about can be scary. But at the end of the day, you have to balance all of the things that go into your position to decide what's right for you. And then for my science trivia, for me, I think one of the things that inspired me first was all of the unique properties of water and how that facilitates life. So, the hydrogen bonding of water is what allows like water striders to balance and walk on water, or, the capillary actions. So all of those things I find fascinating. So that would be my, and then also I'm happy to answer any questions, as we move forward.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and for 2 wonderful science trivia. Dave, gotta mark you points down.
I can throw something out there. So a little Grasslands 101. So why Grasslands rule? So they're underappreciated. So I feel like we always have to upsell them a bit. But so they cover about 40% of the terrestrial land surface, store 1/3 of the terrestrial carbon, and 90% of that is below ground. So it's mostly in the roots and the soils. So even though walking through a grassland sometimes is not the most impressive, they're doing a lot of good work keeping the carbon out of the atmosphere.
All right, thank you for that. I will say I have even more points marked down, as I didn't even introduce myself. I'm your moderator for today. I'm Jesse Bloom Bateman. I'm faculty at SUNY Cortland. I'm also the co-chair of the Biogeosciences section's DEI committee. So thank you all for coming. Because I've been in academia since I left undergrad, I'm also here to learn a fair amount. And so one of the things all 3 of you touched on is that, you had somewhat winding pathways, but it sounds like you interacted with federal work at multiple, different stages of your academic careers, both maybe right after undergrad or during undergrad, during/after grad school, and then continuing through your professional careers. And I'm wondering if you could speak some to how someone can get their foot in the door in different agencies, or if you can only speak to your agency specifically, that's okay. Because we had a lot of people interested of like, how do we actually find jobs or get into these tracks? Because it's a different track of thinking for a lot of people.
I'll go first. So I think there's depending on where you are in your career, there's different ways to get involved. So like I have a field crew every summer, so I'm always hiring summer technicians. They tend to be people in their undergrad or just graduated. And so that's like Sasha, I think that's where you were saying that you first got involved, federal work. And so that's one option. For graduate school, as federal scientists, we still get grants and can co-advise students. So sometimes we'll get a grant and there'll be, like I'm affiliated with Colorado State University, so I've co-advised students, graduate students. And so then you kind of get the best of both worlds. You're working at the university, but sometimes doing like more focused government research. And then like postdoc, there's specific postdocs for federal positions. And then also like in the grant process, we can hire we put money in for postdocs. And so I think there's multiple avenues kind of throughout your career to get involved.
Thank you. Sasha or Tana, do you? Oh, Sasha, yeah.
Or Tana, do you want to go next? I blabbed first last time.
Yeah, so I guess I can second that. There's ways to get involved where you're not officially hired by the government agencies. To have that exposure and seeing how it works. They tend to not be career positions. If you are interested in a career, the easiest way, is applying for positions that allow for direct hire authority at the end, which do tend to come up. So you have to, all official jobs go through USA Jobs. So you have to keep your eye out on USA Jobs and apply. And it can be a short, like 4-month internship that turns into a permanent position. There's also fellowships like the presidential fellowship that you can apply for, where you can get your foot in the door at different agencies and you're allowed to do details at different places to try to see what works out. And through collaboration. So I didn't have one of those, direct hire opportunities. I was doing my postdoc as an associate scientist with the Forest Service office, and they had a position that was coming open that they did, but I had to compete to, nationally to get the position. So there's different ways to go about it, but the easiest way, if you're looking for it to be a career position, and there's different levels, to be a research scientist, I have a PhD. There's some master's level technician positions, or there's some entry level ones, but a lot of the entry level positions can be highly competitive. So having some of that the earlier you can get your foot in the door, the easier it is to sort of, find your way in. And it's also, once you're in a government position, it's easier to change between agencies.
Yeah, so I totally second what Dave and Tana said, and I put that usajobs.gov that Tana talked about. That's where jobs are listed, and the government is very concerned about nepotism. And so, most jobs have to go through usajobs.gov. And so take some time with it, practice it, check it out. It's also where you would apply for those jobs, and it's a confusing application system, and has challenges. And so I would recommend applying for a job you don't want first, and then seeing what mistakes you make, because if you have anything happen, like something doesn't upload right or something isn't in there right, they won't reopen it. You won't be considerable for that job. You will just be told no. And so practice that with a job first, so that you see if you make it through to the next level. And then there's other advice that Dave and Tana and I could give you about applying on USA Jobs. We could talk about it later if people wanted to know about it, but that's the place. The only way to have a job that doesn't go through that is, as Tana said, there are certain programs that allow for more direct hires. At least for USGS, the hiring process, the formal hiring process is rough. It takes a long time. There's a lot of HR steps. And so if you have the ability to be directly hired, that Tana or Dave or I could just say, we pick you, that's a huge advantage, because not only are you awesome and we want to pick you, but it means we don't have to do maybe 9 months of paperwork and waiting to try to be able to hire someone. At least that's for USGS, US Geological Survey. So those programs for USGS, for example, there's the YES program, Youth Education Science, I think, which has different kinds of internships. And the internships would allow you for some period of time after you do that internship to be directly hired into a position in it's either USGS or the federal government at large. I can't remember how that works. So you can check out that YES program. There's also other kinds of programs. For example, USGS has a collaboration with the National Science Foundation that if you are funded by NSF right now, so either through something like a graduate research fellowship program, or if your advisor has NSF money and that's what pays your salary, then you would be eligible for these internships. Thank you very much, Jesse. For the internships to be able to come in and work with a USGS mentor and be with them in their office for some period of time, so that you could, as all of us were talking about, you could kind of see behind the curtain, what's it like to be a USGS scientist or a USDA scientist, and does that align with what you want? And then I think the last piece of advice I'd add to what others said is, like, reach out to us or to someone. If you see someone who has a federal job and you're interested in working with them or what their job is like, cold email them and ask them if they have 20 minutes to talk, to give you a little bit of advice and insight, and it will help you better understand what the opportunities. It could result in a job offer down the line, and it will help you build your network. We've all benefited from other people taking some time for us, and we like to be able to pay that back. And my advice is just to make that email pretty short, to be clear about what you're looking for, and recognizing that time is our most limiting resource, and so that it wouldn't be too long. Maybe give us some sort of compliment. Human beings respond well to hearing something positive that you recognize about us, and why you're reaching out to us, what you think we could provide. And that's my general advice. The last piece of that is, if you don't hear back from us, email us again. It's not that we're actively not wanting to reach out. We get thousands of emails a minute, and so we might just miss it. So I suggest that for anyone you're trying to interact with, if you don't hear back, give it a week and then email again, and just just bumping this up in your inbox in case you missed it, because we genuinely, at least these guys are better than me, but I genuinely miss lots of stuff. And so don't give me only one shot at responding to you.
Jesse, I wanted to kind of circle back to something that Tana said that's important. There's a lot of different types of positions. I think Tana, Sasha, and I are kind of showing this like scientist, PhD track, but there's a lot of permanent positions that don't require a PhD. So you can be a permanent technician. At our agency, we have positions that are support scientists. So they have expertise in like technology or data management or remote sensing specialists. So there's a lot of positions that don't necessarily require a PhD. Usually those require a master's, but there are some that are undergrad only. And then the other thing is like term versus permanent is important, because there's some short-term positions that might just be seasonal. They might be 1 year to 4 years, and those are the term ones. And then there's permanent positions, and those are really different in what they're looking for.
Thank you, Dave. That was actually going to be my follow-up of these technician, do you need a PhD to get into a career space? And sounds like no. To follow up on Sasha, you were talking about the YES program. So when I was in undergrad, I was part of the SCEP program, the Student Career Employment Program. Is the YES program and programs like that, did they replace SCEP and STEP?
YES is the new SCEP. Exactly.
All right. Thank you for that. Yeah. So again, these are programs that when you're a student, you get to work with the agencies, and then at least for SCEP, it was guaranteed hiring within the agency that you were working for, but it could be anywhere in the US, which they wanted to send me to, I think it was like rural Nebraska. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that right now with my life. All right. So stepping into our next question. Let's see. So, all right, looking back, like you've talked about your career pathways in and sort of the way students can get their foot. Oh, actually, no, I don't want to move on to the next topic because someone brought up a follow-up question. I almost forgot it. So there was a follow-up question about for students who are international students and looking for pathways into the federal government, is that a possibility, or is it more of like you need to be a citizen to access any of these jobs?
I posted a link in there. You can get hired through a program called ORISE. It's not a federal position, and they'll help people with visas. So I have a position I'll be advertising for a postdoc that's through that program. It's basically contract, like it's an agreement set up between the agency and ORISE, and I put the link in the chat for that. Otherwise, if it's for a permanent, like it's for like a federal position, you have to be a US citizen.
Just like Tana said, yeah, there's a few exceptions to that, but they're pretty few and far between. Most US federal jobs require citizenship, and there's different levels of citizenship, and different jobs are different and what those are, but there's not that many jobs that you could just be truly, not have some status in the United States. And Lauren, your good question about ORISE. So as Tana said, ORISE, you're not a federal government employee. But it's a way that you could, everything else seems like you are. You can come, you can be in the office, you're using equipment, of those things. They don't, even Dave, as Dave said, term positions don't necessarily turn into permanent positions. And so that moving into the permanent stage, we can talk more about that, but there's not that many positions that I know of, at least in USGS, where it's like, oh, this term is, no matter what, is going to turn into a permanent position. Those positions are still advertised. They still go on usajobs.gov. But what it does do is you're building a relationship with a team who becomes motivated to find you a permanent position. And so there's different steps to that process. And in my experience with ORISE, that doesn't change. You're still becoming part of a group of people. You're seeing if this office, if this agency feels like a good fit for you. They're seeing if it seems like a good fit for you. And if that's the case, ORISE, just like a term position, has the potential to be able to create a position, but that position is still openly, other people would apply. There's not a lot of ways to be like, I'm going to hire this person for a permanent position. There's still, just like in academia, there's, a hiring process and a competitive process that goes on with that. And so the ORISE is another way. I think that you don't have to have had experience with a federal agency to get a job with that agency. There's no mandatory component of that. It can be nice on your CV to show that you've worked for that agency before, because then you're coming to work there because you know the culture and it does feel like a good fit for you. So it could seem more likely to the hiring person that it could be a good match because you do have that experience. But there's no, you can't, the USGS, USDA, ARS, we all hire lots of people who have never worked for the federal government before. So you shouldn't feel like you have to have had that experience before you might be considered for a postdoc or even a permanent position.
To add to Sasha's, the one thing I will say is that applying for a federal position is very different than applying for an academic job. And so you have to apply for the position that's being advertised. And all of the skill, you can't apply for it and then try to convert it into the job that you want it to be. It's, Sasha mentioned that if you don't fill things out correctly, it'll kick you out. If you don't use all the right keywords, you don't even make it through HR. And then from there, it's very regimented, at least for the Forest Service, the panels that I've been on, we look at the resumes and the position description, and we have like set things that we look at and we rank them based on how well they put that in the, it was covered in their resume or their application package. And then we choose people to interview, and we'll interview 3 people, and there might be some requirements, for who we have to choose from to interview. And then from there, it's very regimented. We all ask the exact same questions, and you have to answer those questions very well. And it's how well you answer those questions in line with the job that's being advertised. And so sometimes with academics, they try to kind of shift it to be, well, I could do all of these other things, and then they don't answer the question about what the actual position is, and that's a fatal mistake. So it's very different than an academic hiring process.
I want to amplify what Tana just said, because I think it's hugely important. And to add on, the first phase of the review process happens by HR, not by anyone who's doing the hiring. So if a non-expert can't tell that you're saying you have expertise in the things, you won't make it on the list. And we only get to pick from people on the list. And so you think about that when you're crafting your answers. For example, if the question was, do you have expertise in using a Lycor 6000 for gas exchange? And you're like, I was born measuring photosynthesis. I'm able to, do all kinds of exchange, but you didn't say that you know how to use a Lycor for photosynthesis. They might not recognize that you are meeting the criteria. So my suggestion is the first sentence of any written feedback you give, repeat the question and say you are excellent at it. And then put the rest of the information is what Tana and Dave and I would read and use to evaluate. But make that first sentence for a complete non-expert who will have the say to you make the list or you don't make the list. We can't draw from anyone who's not on that list. So you need someone to be able to tell that you deserve to be on that list.
So in that idea of like making sure that you're checking boxes, it sounds like it's very important in applying for federal jobs. Do you recommend that, like, say you're in an interdisciplinary program, or you're in a program and you might be shifting to something that's related, maybe looking into courses or like field courses or workshops to give you specific technical skills or things that could help you check boxes in the future? Or is it more of just like making sure when you're looking at things, I can think of a way that I can check that box, even if it isn't explicit training that I've done?
I think, you want to go ahead, Sasha? I was just going to say, I think the key is the terms being used, right? So you have to have the skills. And so having the skills is one thing, but then making sure that what you're presenting to them matches what they're looking for. So the example of the gas exchange, right? Like for all of our work we do, there's multiple ways you could say something, describe something. And these people in HR don't have experience in, the forest research or dryland research or whatever it is that you do. And so they're not going to know the variance in those terms. So it's just really important that if it's a course, if it's a skill, if it's like a job experience, that if they're looking for something, that you make sure that it's going to be easy for a lay person to make that connection and not a technical expert.
And I also think that sometimes we don't know if this is, we don't want to say that we're an expert in something because we don't believe that we're really an expert, but this is relative to the common person. So when I was applying for my job, they were asking, for some reason, there was a question about eddy covariance and like hydrology and stuff, but I went to an environmental sciences, I was in an environmental sciences department and I took hydrology classes and I was exposed to that at San Cinema. So I just put in my coursework that was related to that, and that counted and got me through. So, any experience that you have, nobody's going to be looking at this to say you're not the world expert in this. They want to know that you have experience, and you just put in there what your real qualifications are and draw anything. I took a workshop one time on that thing that you're asking about, or I was exposed, right? I meet with people about these things. Anything you can have, for some evidence that would point to that, because sometimes I think some leftover questions end up going through for the positions, but don't undersell your experience. To get through that HR phase, you've got to check, like I said, check all of those boxes, and then it's got to be there when they review the resumes. And then in the interviews, when they're going to really gauge what your fit is for the position and how well you've answered those questions. And I strongly recommend you practice, because they're going to give you an hour. It's going to be the same questions, and you're going to have to make sure that you remember those questions and then go through and answer them if they decide to go through the interview. So there's kind of it's a different, it's very regimented.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tana and Dave said. And I think just to add on to a little bit, Jesse, with your good question, for jobs like PI, principal investigator positions, which is the position that all three of us have, and for jobs like postdocs, a lot of the evaluation we will do will be just like what you would expect in academia. What's your experience? What about publications? What about the things that you might expect? For other kinds of jobs, like Dave was talking about, permanent technician positions and other master's level or bachelor's level jobs, I think for anyone kind of still getting education, I would say big data, GIS, using R, data analysis, they're going to help you in the kinds of jobs we have too. I wish I had more of that. But that those kinds of skills are really what federal agencies and other kinds of institutions are looking for in terms of hiring people. So if you can get some classes in that, if you can take some even online classes and stuff like that, so that you can show you're able to work with big data, you're able to work with spatial data, you're able to do analyses on high numbers of data. I think all of those things would serve you well in lots of different kinds of positions with the federal government and lots of different institutions. So if you're in school still, or you're thinking of taking some other classes, I think those kinds of skill sets are working with working with different types of GIS tools and things would serve you well.
Thank you all for that. It's wonderful advice for everyone. Dana, do you have something you wanted to follow on with that, or?
This should just sort of not need to be said, but I have been on some panels where they didn't do research on our institute, and they were like, "Oh, you're at the University of Puerto Rico," or they didn't look at who the scientists were. And so, do your homework too, so that you can tailor your answers to the position and to the people that are there, and actually know the organization, and do a little homework on how the federal government, the hierarchy of the federal government, and that the Forest Service is part of the USDA, and those types of things come through when you do the interview and you don't have any idea, who it is that you're applying to work with. So
big time. I totally agree with that. And if you're able to be like, "Oh, Tana, I saw your paper on blah, 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 blah," and I had, a question, like, it's like, whoa, you're doing your research, you're checking this out. It really goes a weirdly long way in an interview to show that you spent some time to understand the institution and the people, just like Tana said. And I think too, at the end of those interviews, they will always ask if you have questions, and trying to think of having a question. And sometimes that question can show your knowledge in the homework that you did, or it could be something like one that I heard recently that I liked was like, what would wild success look like in this position? If I did really well in this position, what would that look? But having something, something to say, do you have any questions, to not just be like, no, I think is helpful and kind of gives a good vibe in an interview. So just random unsolicited advice on that.
And I would agree with that. That's just interviewing across all sectors, right? Like if we have a candidate come in, essentially every meeting they'll be in, it'll end with, "What questions do you have?" And if by the end of the day they're like, "No, I have all my questions answered," like, I don't know about that person. They're not curious about what's going on still. This is a problem. So, and because I'm curious about all of you, I know I gave you reflection questions to start with, but I'm kind of switching it up. Instead of like, if you could describe your day-to-day job, I'm wondering if you could sell your not just your agency, like your location in agency, pros, cons list. What's like the biggest pro of working at your site? What's like your greatest con to give people realistic understanding? Yeah, biggest pro, biggest con.
Can't remember whose turn it is to go first, so I'll go first. I think that the biggest, I think I have two pros of what I really like. And so I should have said, so the U.S. Geological Survey is the Department of the Interior's scientific arm. Dave did a nice job of describing ARS. And so the Department of the Interior has the National Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service. USGS, part of the mission is to be able to inform the land management and resource management decisions of those agencies and agencies. Tana and I and Dave and I collaborate a lot. And so we work, it's not just DOI, Department of the Interior agencies that I work with, but I really like that mission of kind of science to inform decision making. I like the idea that I'm not doing my job well if I don't start to translate what we're learning into knowledge and tools and information that can inform decision making. And because of that, I get to a very hip term right now in USGS, and I think other agencies, is co-produce science with end users. So I get to work alongside people from Bureau of Land Management, people from the National Park Service, to help better understand their information needs and to help better understand their decision-making landscape. And what I mean by that is I could provide information in a much more useful way for them to make decisions if I understand how they make decisions. Science is just one of the things they have to balance to be able to make these decisions. There's laws, there's public opinion, there's what's realistic. If I better understand those things, then the science I can deliver is much more likely to be useful. And if we build that together, the science that I deliver is much more likely to be used. And so I really dig that, working with resource managers and providing science that is useful and used. I also I don't like to be told what to do at all. And I feel like my job has a lot of freedom. As Tana said, I don't teach, I don't have some of the same time expectations that would keep me in place. And so I do have these expectations of working with data users, land managers, other groups, but I have a lot of freedom in what I work on and how I go about working on it. And I really like that. Biggest con, I would say, is there's definitely some rules that we have to follow that I don't like. Like, we have to get, these guys don't have to do it in the same way, and it makes me mad. But at USGS, we have when we publish papers, we have to do this internal USGS review that I think is unnecessarily onerous. And even though I don't want to do it, I have to do it. And so there's certain things like that in a federal government. We have staff who helps us and things, but I think, there's a lot of rules and regulations in academia too. I don't mean to discount that, but that we have certain rules that we have to follow. And for the ones that don't make sense and take time, I don't like it. And it makes me annoyed. And so I think that is what I would consider the biggest con.
Thank you. Dave, I saw Dave,
Sure.
you unmuted first.
Mute first. Okay, I'll go. So yeah, I think I have a lot of similar feelings that Sasha just said. I think for me, one of the big cons is the people side of it. So I work in a research unit. There's like 5 PIs, and we work very collaboratively. It's not the case at all units, but we really have an amazing group, and we all have kind of our different expertise. And so we team together and really can tackle issues that are a lot bigger than what we would be doing alone. And so I get to do that kind of at the local level. We engage with producers and land managers, people that are actually doing something with the science. Prior to this, I really hadn't done any work with anyone that's, not a scientist. And so just the transition of thinking about, okay, I need to do something that is applied and usable. And what Sasha mentioned, the co-production model. So we have a group of of ranchers and environmental agencies and environmental groups and federal agencies that we are actually doing a collaborative project together. So working on managing a herd of cattle in this experiment. And it's just taught me so much about what sort of decisions are happening on the ground. And as I'm doing my research, I can then sort of bend it in that direction where it's usable to them. I get evaluated based on impact. So when I go up for my promotion, I have to have impact statements. So I have to say, okay, I've discovered this and here's the papers I did, but that's not the end of it. I have to then say, okay, this, the NRCS is now using this to inform their management, or this producer group is using this. So that's really awesome. And then I'm in a part of this LTAR Networks, is the Long-Term Agro-Ecosystem Research Network. So it's 19 sites around the country. They're all different. They're croplands, rangelands, pasture lands, they're wet systems, dry systems, and it's really multidisciplinary. So I work with social scientists. I see Megan Donovan on this call. Hi, Megan. Who's a social scientist in New Mexico. And so we really get to do these like really big cross-scale research questions that we wouldn't be doing if I was just local. And so that's really fun. And then things I don't like, the bureaucracy is challenging. I don't know if that's specific to, there's certain things that make it challenging being the federal government. I know academia has its own set of rules you have to deal with. I'd say for me, the uncertainty of the political environment is challenging. So, having to plan, like I was supposed to go to an international trip last October, and there was potentially a shutdown on September 30th. And so that's just a level of uncertainty that's just out of our control, and it makes us have to follow the news a lot more than maybe we'd like to, but just the reality of the job. And we are in the executive branch. And so the person that's in charge and the people below that person has big influence on the direction of what the agencies are doing. And so that can change, as the politics change. And so that's a level of uncertainty that just makes it a little stressful sometimes.
So I feel the same way, actually, both, Sasha and Dave. So I basically have my dream job. Like, I absolutely love what I do. I get to do research 100% of the time. It's really important to me to do research that I feel a sense of purpose in the work that I'm doing, that it's going to have a positive impact for society. Like, I need to feel that meaning, and I get that because the Forest Service expects you to do research in line with their mission, and that mission aligns well with what I'm interested in seeing happen. There's different ways of being successful within the Forest Service. So as Dave mentioned, you have to show impact of your work, but that could be impact academically, that I'm moving the field forward and scientists are using and citing my work, and I'm very productive in that way. Or it could be that I'm working with managers and providing research that they're using, and I can show that this is something that people are using and are interested in. So you have to, or that it's influencing policy in some way. And so I really like the fact that there's different ways that I can be successful within the Forest Service beyond just putting out lots of papers and being a famous scientist. And always keeping in mind that I am a public servant. And so I do a lot of outreach, and the Forest Service supports that. And they like that we do training and workshops. That's valued. And I have a lot of freedom to decide the research direction, the direction I want my research to take. And so I can evolve, within some limits. So, Sasha and I have been collaborating for a long time on a climate change experiment in Puerto Rico. And, that brings lots of different ways to do interdisciplinary research. But then now I'm moving into urban ecology because I see that as an urgent need of something that we need to be doing, thinking about flood modeling. And so I can look and see what I think the biggest problems are, and then adjust my research, to follow what I'm interested in. We have 100% salary cover, so I don't have to raise salary. I'm able to be on student committees, adjunct professor. If I wanted to teach a class, I could. And I can also write grants. So one of the differences with academia is that they don't give you, or I didn't get startup money. Everything is the government's. There is no Tana's lab, it's the Forest Service lab, and there's a lot of rules involved in working in that space, but any equipment that I get belongs to the government. But I can be a PI on proposals depending on the rules and bring in extra money to be able to allow me to do the research that I want to do. And so all of that, this is a very good fit for me in terms of, my interests and goals. Then the challenge is, it can be difficult to hire people and to be flexible and buying things can be hard. Like it took me a year to buy a piece of equipment because they keep changing the forms that you need to have. And then they asked me to do this horrible training for how to do purchases. That took me 20 hours and I was crying and I was like, never again. You have to go through ethics if you want to, travel and other people have invited you to travel. It can be difficult to travel on short notice. And then, I'm able to speak to the media, but I do have to always be thoughtful of the fact that I'm representing the government. It's not like I have to stay in my lane in terms of, talking about the research, but not moving into policy or things that I think the government should do. So there's some guidelines, but all of these things are workable if you understand the system. I'm like, okay, I can't hire somebody this way, but a collaborator can hire them as an intern or as a contractor. And so, we managed to make it work. But for me, the positive far, far outweighs these small inconveniences, which I think you have to always, whenever you're thinking about what job you want, you have to think about whether or not the positives far out. Like you can put up with what the negatives are, to be able to do the work that you're doing. And so for me, these negatives are not, enough to make me say I would ever leave this job.
Thank you all, and wonderful and very great insights into working in the federal government. And I was like, especially on like the federal level politics and how that can impact what you're doing whether or not you're furloughed. So we're winding down on our time, and so this last one is like one piece of professional advice for folks to take away. And I'd like you to think about it as like, usually we think of like, oh, if you could go back and give your younger self advice, even if you go back 5 years ago, like that doesn't really work because so much has changed. If your younger self was in undergrad or grad school today, what advice would you give them if they still wanted to get to where you are or into the Forest Service or USGS or ARS? And I think it's Tana's turn to start.
So my advice would be that you don't, at least, at the undergraduate level, I'm sorry if you guys can hear the construction. At the undergraduate level, you don't have to know what you want to do. Like it is absolutely okay to take that time and try different things and learn for them to decide, what it is that you want to go from there. But I meet a lot of students that feel this pressure to that they've got to finish and get into grad school and do these things or have this job, and you don't. You can go off and do other things. You could be a ski bum like Sasha for a little while and still end up getting the job that you want in the end. There's many ways to end up and ultimately finding the job that's right for you. And then I think the other advice, is what I've mentioned before, is really that you're the one that's determining what's successful. You have to decide what the work-life balance is that you want, what it is that you want to get out of your job. And it might be going into communication, it might be leaving science or teaching, or it might be going the academic route, but there's many ways to have a career in the sciences, and that has to come from you.
Me? Okay. I'll just say, for, again, speaking to this particular, like, kind of PI tract, I think demonstrating that you're a really good scientist. So having the publications, having breadth of your knowledge, and just really being able to show that you can excel and have big impact is important. And I think that'll translate to a lot of different jobs. So just, get those papers out, get those grants, get some good collaborations so that when you're applying for jobs, you have some good references. I think that sort of works in any scenario.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those, and I think would add to that, to kind of follow what you're genuinely interested in, follow your heart, to say it in a cheesier way. That I think, you know, this is my dream job too, just like Tana, and I think it would be a job I wouldn't like if I didn't genuinely love the questions that I was asking and the work that I was doing. And so I hear early career scientists often like, oh, what should I go into to get a job? I sense and recognize there's a lot of stress about getting jobs, and people trying to pick the direction that they go in based on what the job market might look like, but you really can't know that. And so my advice is to just go with what you like and don't judge what you like. You know, Tana was saying this too, that you'll be at a meeting and talking to someone and they're talking so passionately about something and you're like, oh my gosh, yawn. And then you're talking so passionately about your thing and you can see their face glaze over and wish they never came up and talked to you. We just love the things we love. We like to study what we like. Find what you like to study and head in that direction. And I think that then you'll, you know, and the other good advice that Dave and Tana get, you'll be able to find the position that really matches you well. Follow what you just genuinely dig.
Thank you all. That was just wonderful closing comments. I'm gonna tag on my piece of professional advice would be the only job you're guaranteed not to get is the one you don't apply for. So don't cut yourself out before the application. You gotta take that shot, because let someone else tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. All right. And so with that, we're going to be ending the recorded portion